Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with Kansas City jazz musician and educator Christopher Burnett. He talked about the new COVID-19 jazz world that we are living in now. We had a raw and open talk about this new coronavirus environment, a world that's been on lockdown since mid-March 2020. We talked about the state of jazz, what the future may be, and so much more about this current situation. So please dig this interview.
I've been really trying to reach out to musicians and advocates and everybody in the community that loves jazz, and I really wanted to talk to you about this world that we're living in and everything that's going on. So thanks for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for calling, and the work that you're doing is tremendous. How many interviews have you done in the last couple of weeks?
Just in the last couple of weeks, if you take that number, let's just say around 6 per day times 14, that's probably about where we're at for a 2-week period.
Whoa. That's making it work. You're making it do what it do.
Well, yeah, that's what you got to do. I mean, and that's ranging from, musicians. Like yesterday, I was talking to a musician, Jorge Rossi, and he was on his balcony in Spain, and they were getting ready to do what they're doing in New York, and they were applauding and making noise for the nurses. And he said, sorry about the noise. And I said, no, don't be sorry. Take the phone and put it on speaker right now. And he did, and those moments were amazing. Like Nils Lundgren from Sweden I spoke to as well, and every country has their particular spin and how they're doing this and their restrictions and all of that. So it's been really refreshing to talk from all aspects. And the interesting thing is that I hear the joy and then contrast that with the desperation of some of the people that have been inside that aren't really digging this whole, not being able to do live music. I mean, there's a lot that are okay doing music at home or having a respite, but there's a lot right now where I can start hearing the desperation where it's they want daylight and they don't know how they're going to get the chlorophyll. So, and anyway, that's a long answer, but that's kind of been the row, so to speak.
Well, I think that amplifies, in my opinion, what each of us need to do. You're doing what you do. You did not stop doing interviews. If anything, you've ramped it up 5 or 6-fold at least, and you're producing content in a time when the community and the world needs that, like we talked about earlier, right? And that's something positive. The thing that, if there's any positive that comes out of this, I think it's making people, and I've seen other posts and other blogs and articles alluding to, if there is a positive, it's making us stop, circle our wagons, and look at the dynamic and the paradigm that's going on within our world as artists. Not only socially what's going on with this pandemic, that's a huge thing medically, but we're looking at our sphere. Like, I'm looking at my businesses. I just started a nonprofit foundation that put these 4 major projects that I've been working on for the last decade and a half under one umbrella, and I'm able to refocus and restructure those businesses where they can be a bigger tangible good to the infrastructure of jazz music and contemporary improvised music, American music. And looking at what is happening now, where we have a spring and summer program with Casey Area Youth Jazz, it may end up just being a summer program. If we are released from our stay-at-home orders in the summer, we will have a program. It's flexible enough and nimble enough that I could modify the program to have it meet the goal and the mission of what our program does, and that's make a recording. Even instead of doing a full album, if we have to do an EP or a singles, to give the kids that experience and show them how that works in that process. If we, instead of having 16 meetings and we have 4, 6, 8 meetings, that's still going to accomplish what we need. I think that if all of us try to look through the fog and the pain and everything of this situation and try to find those type of things like you did with your interview series, your radio program, and like I'm doing with this aspect, KC Area Youth Jazz, and then what we do with ARC, I've got to get Arthur White, Dr. Arthur White. He's out at Cal Poly now, but he's a Kansas City cat. He's putting out his album with us, so I've got to get him his barcode, ISRC codes, and everything else. So ARC is going along the way it should. The Bird Boot Camp is in August. That's the third project, and that boot camp is still going on. I've got a grant in for that. I'm working with KC Jazz Alive and other organizations, Meyer Music, people like this, to make that happen. And it's encouraging to see across the spectrum of the scene, whether that's national or locally or regionally or international, the organizations are standing up in a way that makes Catalyst mean something. Like example, Arts KC, I help distribute something. I'm on their list, and I'm listed in their Arts KC Go as an artist and stuff like that, and I put my events up there. But they have a really robust system where they are part of a grant awarding, and they're doing something to help. They've got a fund set up, and I help pass out that link for people who is a gigging musician and saying, "Hey, man, I make my living doing that," or I make a significant portion of my living playing live performances, and that's all dead. Let me apply for this scholarship or grant or whatever they're offering, and the information's there. So there are people. We got sucker punch, got hit in the gut, and people doubled over. But I'm seeing people stand up and say, okay, let me take a deep breath and let me engage this thing so that I'm doing my part. I'm not trying to solve the whole thing. Let me do my part for the art and the infrastructure. Is that along the line of what you're seeing, Joe?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of high levels of triumphant people that are happy with things that have kind of transpired so that we can kind of get some boiling down some of the consumerism elements and some of the elements that we hold up so highly that are superfluous. But then again, I see other parts of this where there's a very, very grim reality that live jazz is swallowed up, and a lot of these musicians are younger, have graduated from school, are not only trying to pay off debt, but are using just the 1099 model as a living thing. And that ain't going to cut it right now because there's no insurance. There's no, there's a lot of these cats that may not have even filed for their taxes, and they're not going to get any relief money, and there's that. So there's both sides. But I think what you're saying is that at the end of the day, this is the thing. And I was just talking about this with my last interview. And I was even talking to my wife about this last night. The thing about this is that whoever you are before this pandemic is only going to get magnified right now. So if you're the type of person that holds on to hope, that holds on to the sunshine coming in and hitting the flower, you're going to be the one that's going to manifest in a way. Now, not saying there's not going to be sadness and there's not going to be hurt that goes into this, but at the end of the day, if you complain and you see the glass half full before this, you're going to be that way afterwards, and it's going to magnify, I think. But at the end of the day, there are lessons to be learned from all of this. So I think overall, the musician community, I really felt through all of the interviews that everybody is doing their very best to keep their chins up, hoping for the best. And I'm talking about a lot of people from the New York, New Jersey area because that's the epicenter. And these are people that don't have cars like we do in the Kansas City metropolitan area. Like, for instance, right now, I am sitting in front of Longview Lake looking at rain hitting the water, and it's beautiful. And it's like, it's serene, and I can do that. And I can watch nature and possibly see a bird land on a branch and kind of get this compendium of life. But there's people in these very urban jungles that are getting stared down and getting glowered at if they even leave their apartments, if they can even do
Right.
that. And you know what I'm saying? So when you think about, the difference between being in a very spread out area like Kansas City compared to being in kind of this concrete origami, so to speak, of like a big place like that, it's hard. And that's why I hear the desperation in the New Yorker's voice. I get off the phone with some of them, and they're not just saying thank you. They're saying, this is exactly what I need to do to keep my brain going, because some of these guys haven't picked up a horn. I talked to a guy yesterday that has not picked up the horn for 6 weeks. It just hasn't been something that they've been interested in. They're more interested in live music, and they may be more interested in gardening. I mean, there was another guy that I spoke to probably within 2 weeks of this that was in his garden in Queens, and it was an amazing conversation. And he is one of those guys that has risen up the charts. He's a star in the world, and he just isn't making music right now, and he is wanting to garden and do whatever he can with his hands. And when this is done, he wants to get an RV and go with his family and see all that he can see in this country. And he may not get back to music for a while. So there's a lot of these things. And to me, a lot of people might see that as not hopeful, but maybe that's what some people need, is a reboot. I mean, we may not be seeing actors and actresses and big-time musicians come back. They have tons of money. They don't have to worry about releasing albums. They don't have to worry about tours. They don't have to worry about pressures. So if they've gotten this respite, and they don't have to worry about money, and they get to live in their homes that probably have pools and all the amenities that we can't even imagine, why would some of them want to return to this crazy pace of life? This could really reboot people.
What you did is you just described an opportunity in my mind, and this is the way I think. I always see half full. I don't care how bad it is. I always try to see the half full, and you just described or reinforced what I was thinking. You said reboot. I'm just saying realignment and bringing things forward into the 21st century, not working off of models that are 100 years old for live performance gigs. You go to Europe, you play 2 hours, and you get paid generally more than you do any place in the States, New York included. And what I'm saying is the infrastructure now has a chance during this respite to say, okay, I'm at a club here in Kansas City, and I bring in great local talent and great national and international and regional talent, worthy enough that people in this area patronize my place enough to keep me in business. So my place holds 200 people. What if I put a live stream? We've got the technology. Most everybody has fast enough internet. Most everybody's phone will do that. And let me charge $2 for the admission for you to watch a live stream. And I would do that. I live in the Northwest Metro. I can't always get to an hour to Kansas City to go listen to live music. I don't have that buffer within my schedule, all the projects I have going on and the things where I'm doing. I'm over 60 now. I'm not trying to play in the club every night or go to jam sessions or hang out. I used to like to do that, but I'm doing other things that are at my level, I think, contributing as well to the scene. And I play when I want to. I play my concerts and things like that. But if I could sit at home on a Friday or a Saturday and know that I could tune into the Green Lady or the Blue Room or the wherever, Folly or something like this, and pay a couple of bucks, or I could tune into Lincoln Center and watch the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, or I could tune into the Vanguard and watch the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra for a couple of bucks, or I could go to Duke Lombard's in Paris, or Ronnie Scott by doing it virtually. Think about exponentially what we're talking about here. Instead of 150 people paying a $10 cover or $20 cover in person and one drink minimum per set, you're talking about 10,000 people online paying $5 watching or $2 watching. 10,000 times 2 is 20,000. 10,000 times 5 is 50,000. That just paid for your year. That was my marketing budget at the Jazz Museum, $50,000 a year with the grants and stuff that came in from the city and all of that. I mean, if you think about what could happen if one of these clubs earned $50,000 in 1 week what kind of venue would that turn into? I mean, what could that person do? Okay, nice first-class PA, blah, blah, blah. They could put more musicians to work at a living wage, where the person could buy health insurance, where they could do a reasonable number of gigs a week, and you'd have more of them doing that. You could diversify your presentation pool and pay them union scale. I'm a member of the union. I know most people aren't. But you could at least pay that or artist wage to where somebody could make several $1,000s a month, and you're not hurting the business or anyone. That's just what I see with the possibilities of technology. I've always been on that technology tip. I've been an advocate for digital music since the 90s and MIDI files and stuff like that, and the platform that this gives us. I'm saying now the people who were resistant to it way back then, like fellow artists saying, Chris, you're nuts for putting your music on the internet and giving it away for free, and now everybody does that. Major labels putting MP3.com out of business because they let people store their personal music collections online in a secure, like what is a Dropbox of your own on their server. The record label sued them out of business, and now you have iTunes that does that, Spotify that does that. It's just a shift. I mean, and now you're talking about Apple Music. Tim Cook saying he's doing this magnanimous thing of, oh, we'll give you an advance on royalties to you independent labels. No, that's the company store again, guy. You're becoming the old infrastructure that digital music busted away from it and gave people like me and 90% of the people in Kansas City a chance to put out records and document their work and not have it stolen, being able to leave it to your heirs and assign. I think that we have a chance if artists like those you've been talking to, those I've been talking to, and seeing posts on social media, if we're able to enunciate that in a way that it tangibly impacts the economic infrastructure for musicians in our time, not back in Bird's time, not in Miles's time, not in the 60s, 70s. We're talking about the 2020s, the roaring 20s, you know. I mean, we need to do that now. And as nimble as technology is, it does not take much to make that happen. You've got business minds. You've got brilliant people all through the community. Like example, at KC Jazz Alive alone, you've got some of the leading business people anywhere who they could model anything for you. These boards that some of these nonprofits have, that's the same thing. Those are our leaders. But we've got to turn their gaze toward this opportunity, I think. I think that we have to make that a priority to say, hey, at least consider this. Because when I was doing, it's been like a few years, it's been about 4 or 5 years since I've worked for the Jazz Museum, but I used to have access to the marketing reports from the CBA, Visit KC. And they do this in-depth study. They'd hire somebody and spend like 5 digits, $30,000, $40,000 on this survey to show who was spending money on entertainment and this and the different fields. And I knew how much people in this region spend on art. So that gave me an idea of who I was targeting first. And then it gave me hope because, okay, they're spending these millions of dollars on the type of entertainment that we put on in our programming. So I don't want all of that. I just want some of that. So some of that to make my numbers is possible. So I would refine my strategy. I think that every venue in Kansas City, every business owner, there should be a different mentality, a reset of mentality, because it's not this territorial, okay, this is my block, analog. I'm in the brick and mortar world. This is my block, this is my territory, you don't come in here, blah, blah, blah. That kind of mentality with the digital space, all that's busted away. You don't give me permission to be a musician. You can not hire me if you don't want to, and you can freeze me out of your clique or whatever you want to, but I've got online. I reach people all around the world, whether you like it or not. I do business all around the country. I give lessons online to people that I give lessons to now. I'm giving everybody lessons online, but I had online studio practice before this happened, along with my offline walk-in music store studio practice. So, and I write music, and I deal with a firm in LA that I send production music to. So nobody has given me permission to be a musician. As soon as we stop thinking that way, that there aren't any gatekeepers, you're the gatekeeper of yourself and your own project. Like I'm the gatekeeper of Burnett Music Foundation that has Artist Recording Collective and Casey Area Youth Jazz, Jazz Artistry Now, and Bird Boot Camp. But within those projects, I'm working with a diverse range of people that crosses every aspect, and they're not only just around Kansas City. So we have an opportunity. What is that parallel to what you were describing, Joe?
Yeah. I actually have interviewed a handful of people that are doing that same thing. Like Joshua Espinoza and Warren Wolf sold online tickets to a theater in Baltimore, and it sold really, really well. I've seen Jackie Myers from her home do shows and have a Venmo account, and she has made comments that she's made as much, if not more, doing that than a live gig without having to move all of her equipment and go through all of the resources that would take her to do that.
Common sense.
You know, you start thinking maybe this is a temporary, but it's more of what you said. It's more long-term. And this is the thing. Every single time the recording industry has had a new media come out, they have thrown their hands up and said, we're going to be bankrupt. When 8-track went to cassette, and what happened? Cassette sold like crazy, okay?
Exactly.
Cassettes go to CDs. CDs sell like crazy. CDs go to digital. Digital sells like crazy. So every time they're like, oh, my God, VHS is going to DVD. We're going out of business. It always is the opposite, and that's exactly the way this is. And that's the thing. We got to this point where it's like, oh, it's digital. It can't go any higher. The sky is the ceiling, and it's like it's not, because if you get above the sky, you can see these stars in this vast expanse of solar system that never ends. So we've thought this whole time that digital music and Spotify and Apple Music is it, but it actually isn't, and we've reinvented it through a pandemic. It's called virtual shows, because if it rains or it's bad weather, or in Kansas City, I know since I've covered jazz in Kansas City, there's been some sketch nights where you can't drive because it's very slippery. Or I've talked to people that say, I can't get into the Blue Room in the winter because the weather's bad. Well, maybe you can now, because so you're exactly right, and I think that we're going to have to adapt ourselves to a new thing. Now, we're all going to want live music, and I don't think that any of that's going to go away. Same thing with CDs. Of course. Like, I still can't believe I get CDs in the mail, and I'm old school, so I love popping it in. I love driving and listening to jazz, and it gets me to that point. But when I went to my son's school about 5 years ago and did a guest speaking gig as a radio host, I gave kids CDs that paid attention to the presentation, and I'd give them CDs that I got in the mail from PR agents. And one of the kids came up to me, a neighbor kid, 2 weeks later, and I said, how's that CD? He said, we don't have a CD player at home.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Exactly. We don't have anything to play. We don't even know what this is, so it's a cup holder now. You know, so it's
exactly.
It's all about, yeah.
But exactly you talking about CDs. What I'm doing now is I'm going to make like 50 LPs, and everything else is just going to be digital. I'm not even going to manufacture CDs, because it's not even economically worth it. Like you said, that kid is telling you, and some people do like a short run of CDs because they go to the gigs, and there's somebody that does, like yourself or myself, that has a CD player or a system that has every component in there, and they're going to buy the CD because they get it from the artist and the artist signs it. And a lot of those people are like me. They've got a turntable, where you can play, a nice turntable that goes through a nice system that you can play LP albums that from your collection from back in that era. I've got records from that era, and I still buy new ones. But what you were saying about the live shows, to go back to that part of what you were saying, Michael Jeffrey Stevens, a great piano player from New York. I think he teaches and lives in North Carolina now. But he travels the world, or at least was traveling the world with several groups, has released over 100 recordings. He's on ARC. That's how I got to know him. And we've developed a friendship, and we have a collaborative group, the Stevens Burnett Quartet, and we played a gig several years ago, I think 17 or something, 16 or 17, at Westport Coffee House, and then I streamed it and charged an admission. And that streaming concert, and I only charged like $1, we earned $100 from that concert, that 2-hour concert, from just the streaming alone. So I was able to give Michael $100 to defray his ticket costs, basically, too, for coming up here and doing that, just from that alone. And I did not push it. I could have charged $5 for that at least, and made $500 or $10 possibly, because Tom does he does a great job. He gives you a video anyway, but his sound is always perfect, and the lighting is perfect for the video. So when I was streaming that concert, that was like, whoa, if anyone needs a model, they should go talk to Tom, because he's been doing this for years. If you look on YouTube and just find, or his Vimeo channel, and find the video from shows that he's agreed with ours to post up there, it's pristine. The video is very high quality, the audio is high quality, and what the band is playing is what you get. So that, in our community, that's the cat to go talk to and say, hey, how would we set this up and turn this into a live thing? That's one venue right there. And I'm not even talking about the other ones, because Kansas City is lucky. I was talking with a former student of mine, or a current colleague, and he considers me a mentor along with a lot of other people here in the scene. He goes to Berkeley now, and he was talking about that aspect of Kansas City, that there are more jazz venues in Kansas City than there are in Boston, in New York. I mean, they're different. There's no more places to play. And I'm going, you're kidding me, right? He goes, no, Chris, no. So,
I hear that all the time. I mean, I hear people, who was I speaking to? I was either speaking to Jim McNeely or Dick Oates this weekend, and they were like, man, Kansas City, are you kidding me? I mean, he was gushing. Everybody has. I mean, it's like, they're so happy because they have an educator soul in them like you do, and they're like, man, alive. It's like, it's amazing. In fact, I got a couple of stories before this happened that you're going to appreciate. First of all, kind of very ever-present to this, I got a chance to interview Bobby Watson for Jam Magazine, and that was so refreshing. It was so much fun, man. It was early March, and it was awesome, and he was just talking about, how these guys are staying in Kansas City and kind of that whole thing. But I got to tell you, the two things that I did, the first thing I did before all the music got silenced, and I didn't know that this was going to happen. My wife, since we've gotten together and married, we've been together about 3.5 years now, she goes to all these jazz things, and she's always like, man, he brings me to all of them, and she loves it. But I took her to Bill Frisell around the 3rd of March at the Nelson Atkins, and she totally flipped out. Like, she'd never seen anything like that. And I kept telling her, I said, I don't know how to describe this to you. I have no idea how to describe what he's going to do. And I didn't know it was trio. I just didn't know, or it was a quartet. It's his new quartet. I didn't know how this group was going to parlay out, but she just was totally freaked out. But I got to tell you, there's something in that room. There's something in the cerebral part of our brains that maybe knew something was coming up. Towards the end of that show, Petra stood up and saying, "We shall overcome," and the whole crowd in unison just started, one by one, started standing up and swaying, singing, "We shall overcome."
Oh, my goodness gracious. That's heavy, man.
Wow, yeah, and I'm just sitting thinking, like, after that. So the very last jazz thing I did in Kansas City, and I knew this was going to be it, I covered the visit from Maxine Gordon for Sophisticated Giant, the book, with Deborah Brown. And she gave me the rundown of her show, which was on the 13th, and I don't even know if that happened. But on the 12th, Maxine was there at the college the day before they closed it down, and she was going to talk about the book, and I'd read the book and profiled it on the show, and we're sitting there. And the very last thing I did, I remember I looked over, and they brought cookies and juice, and I wouldn't touch them, and I was very careful at that point of what I was doing, and it was right after we announced that the world was going to go into this shutdown. And I got to go up to her, and I said, "I just want to ask you for my show, what was so timeless about Dexter? Why is it that no matter what era we're in, Dexter will always make sense and he will always make sense? And she just looked at me and just was like, I've never, ever heard that question before. Will you please send this to me? And it was like the last live jazz thing I got a chance to do. And it was so good because she was so happy and just explained her answer kind of resonated with when he did Round Midnight, how they wanted his music to sound, but he was like, no, I'm doing it this way. This is the way I do it. And he was doing it that way because that's Dexter. That's the timelessness. You don't mess with something that has always resonated with people no matter what era you're in. It's like a David Lynch film. You don't know if it's the 50s or the 90s, but you know
exactly.
You know that music is just timeless. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know, because I've kind of talked about that in these jazz therapy sessions with musicians, that those were the last two things that I was going to do. And I was very conscious of talking to Maxine and seeing them there. And it was almost bittersweet because I knew when I walked off that campus, that was it. I was really wanting to go see Deborah perform that next night, but that was when everything was getting really heavy. And I don't even know if that happened. So it was kind of it was strange to know that everything, not knowing how long it was going to be, because at that point, they're like, yeah, we're shutting everything down for 2 weeks. Major League Baseball will start on April 8th. We're all thinking, oh, man, 2 weeks. And now when we look back at that in the evolution of this time frame, it's like, wow, that was nothing compared to what we don't know now.
Exactly. Another beautiful thing about what we're doing with this technology and what it's forcing us to do, as educators, I before you called, just when you called, I had hung up with a young musician who's great energy. He works with young kids in private lessons, and I think he actually teaches in KCK. But he contacted me through social media and asked he saw what I was doing with my teaching. I post some things about it. And I posted advocating using online platforms to teach from, to keep going that way. So he contacted me and he says, Chris, what do you do? How do you modify your syllabus to make it effective using the technology? You know, the latency, even as good as it is when we're playing instruments, unless you have the microphones that don't cause the impact or over, I don't know what you audio guys call it, when it maxes out the capacity, the condenser or whatever the microphone is, and causes it to interrupt. And most kids don't have that. So he was asking me, how do you get around these certain parameters? I said, first thing is in-person lesson. I've been teaching private lessons since 1983. My very first student is he's the vocal music director over at the Paseo Academy of Fine and Performing Arts, Willie Thornton, Reverend Willie Thornton. He was my very first student. I was still in the Army when I taught him. He was 16 or something like that. And now he's like a grown man over 50. But this guy was telling me, how do you do this? How do you make it work? And I told him, I said, the thing that I have found is we have to be more organized than we are for in-person lessons. And a lot of the time, it's not like you're wasting time or something in an in-person lesson, but there's a lot of filibustering that goes on that before you know it, the half hour's up or the hour's up and the next kid comes in or something, or it's another time. But with an online lesson, what you have to do is really direct them through the different sequences. My lessons, I've always set them up in 3 areas, and they're the 3 practical factor areas: scale, technique, and literature. And everybody does that to a degree. Every teacher I've ever studied with, they do that whether they tell me they're doing that or not. But what I did is consciously broke down and made syllabus at different levels for each one of those areas. So if I have a middle school kid that doesn't know all the fingerings to their instrument, let's say I have a little saxophone player in the 6th or 7th grade, and they're struggling because they don't recognize that an F is an F and what finger does that. I start them, their first scale is the chromatic scale, and I use the one in their method book, like Essential Elements book, an example they have in the back, 46 and 47, that's the fingering chart. That's their first scale. So I have them bracket it out in 4 groups. I bracket out the first 4 notes, that's a low range of the saxophone. then the next from D to C sharp, and that octave without the register key, then D to C sharp with the octave key, and then the high notes from D to up to F. And those are 4 distinct groups. And I make them recognize and make them quantify. So I make them number under each one of those note names, and they come up with 32 fingerings for the saxophone. And most of them never do that. If you give that book to a 6th grader and you have them open up page 46 and 47, that's overwhelming information. It's got the drawing that shows where your finger's supposed to be. It shows where the note lives. It shows the staff. It shows its name. And then it has all these symbols that are different than alphabet, you know. So, but if you make them quantify, and that's what we musicians really do. When they say that we're good at math, that's how we're good at math, because we learn how to quantify and break things down into 2s, 4s, 3s, whatever, 6s, 11s, and we're able to divide things in half or into thirds, you know, and we're able to make sure that we're doing it. Successful musicians, that's what you're doing inherently. So when you start out a kid, and I like the little kids, the 6th, 7th graders, because they don't argue with you and they don't think they know more than you and they don't try to teach you, which is okay back and forth sometimes with some kids. But the little ones, you just set them on that program and they learn that over a month and a half. You go through 6 weeks of teaching them those fingerings, and in about a month and a half, they know all the fingers and they can play the entire range of their instrument. And then they go to their band class and their friends are still struggling with what note that is, and they're like going, whoa, well, this is pretty fun. I understand what the teacher's doing. I can pay attention better. I can hear what's going on around me because I'm not struggling. What button do I push, or how do I get that sound out of my instrument? So that type of thing is what I shared with him. And I shared with him that was fundamental to anything else you teach. If you're trying to teach a kid, as an example, a high school kid that doesn't know all 12 of their major scales, if you're trying to teach them an etude, all you're doing is trying to get them to memorize something, because they are not qualified to play anything if you can't play in all 12 keys. And that doesn't mean you've got to run around like Bird and play Donna Lee in all 12 keys. I'm not saying that. I'm saying to be able to simply play major scales in all 12 keys. And then he asked me, he says, okay, Chris, why do you say that? Well, I understand. I had to learn that in college, et cetera. I said, well, basically, think about it. I mean, all the music is written. It doesn't always change key either. I mean, if you know your major scales, you know the basis for every scale. You start on the 6th note of any major scale, that's the natural minor form. If you understand how to get to the natural minor form, you can play the other forms. But what about melodic minor scale? It's all messed up. Blah, blah, blah. I said, well, if you know your major scale, if you know a C major scale, this is what I tell my kids. I said, I have a 7th grader that can play every scale there is. He goes to like Platte County or something like that. He's near Leavenworth, just right across the river from us. And he can play all the scales because he learned all the major scales. And then I was able to relate this to him. Okay, we want to learn the melodic minor scale. Oh, Mr. Burnett, we don't do those in 7th grade band. I said, well, we're going to do them here in lesson because you're ready to do them. You want to try it? Okay. A 7th grader? Okay. They always say okay. I say, take the 3rd note of that C major scale. E, yes, and make it E flat. And just play the C major scale with an E flat up. So he plays it up. I said, coming back down, do you remember the E flat major scale? Yes, sir. How many flats is that? 3. Use that coming back down. So he did that. I said, you just played the C melodic minor scale in the traditional classical form of it. And you only had to know the C major scale and then the E flat major scale, that 3rd that you lower down. You didn't even know the key signatures above those scales to do it. And he goes, wow. I said, yeah, you got to do that 12 times. And it's using material you always know. Music is regenerative, and that's what our conversation has been about. When you were talking to all of these people and you were interacting with these people and then they were relating things, you regenerated them. You gave them energy and let them use that side of all of us, that great side of us that music brings out, and jazz in particular does, because it's so creative. But what that did with that young man, he was empowered from that point to realize, to look beyond the page or the assignment and say, so this is what music is about. It's about exploring as well. There's no wrong or no right. And everything I learn is accumulative, like a compound interest. You know, you learn the first 4 notes of the C scale, you know the last 4 notes of the F scale, and so on. The first 4 notes of the G scale, you know the last 4 notes of the C scale. You combine the first 4 notes of the C scale with the first 4 notes of the G scale, that's the C scale. And you've got two parts of two other scales in there. So you always get that lapping thing that goes in. I am always trying to learn. I recently took an online lesson with a great alto player that I've been a fan of for ages, a guy named Vincent Herring. And the reason I knew about Vincent Herring is because in 1985, I was still in the Army band. And I got a call from the West Point band that had this big band called the Jazz Knights. And there was an opening, and they wanted me to come there. My name came up as the first person that they wanted to come and take that slot. And I said, whoa. So I talked to the guy on the phone and the personnel manager, the leader of the band, and they said, yeah, we've heard about you and we've heard some of your stuff, and we'd like you to come and take this place. And I say, who am I replacing? Who's leaving? He says, an alto player named Vincent Herring. He's going to New York. He's going to be playing like with Matt Adderley and those guys. He's been going down there and he's just going to get out. I said, whoa, okay, I got to check this guy out because I never heard of his name. And ultimately, long story short, I wasn't released. They did my commander and people that were in charge of me of that band. They said, no, we're not going to give you to them. You're going to stay here. And I said, I thought it was an opportunity I could have. It's a different thing. But fast forward to now in social media, I was able to connect with him and follow him and stuff like that. And we interact and things like this. I went to his website one day, and I do that periodically and check out what cats are doing. And I saw that he offered lessons, and I signed up for one. And then I wrote him a note, and I said, Mr. Herring, I would like to learn two things from you. I would like to learn your approach, how you're teaching your students, whom I've heard on your posts on social media just burn and play great stuff, and I can tell they're studying with you by what they're doing. And I want to learn that from you, how the approach you're using, your approach to teaching them, and then some of the approach you're using to playing, like the different styles, bebop, post-bop, modal, different things. And he's got all those things. And then the second part of the lesson, I want to approach what is your approach towards your small group records? Because every one of your small group records are brilliant. I like their arrangements. If you listen to his arrangement of Star Eyes on one of his tunes, it's just cool. It's hip. It's a standard, but the way they do it, it's really just really cool. And always swing and always burn and depend on the stuff. And he said, great. So we set up a lesson, and I almost blew it because I didn't think about him being on the East Coast an hour ahead of us, and I just assumed that he knew I was in Kansas City. When I said 10 to 11, he said, that's good. He was thinking 10 to 11 Eastern time, so he was waiting like an hour, and I get this like text message saying, hey, man, are you going to take a lesson? And I went, oh, no, at 10 o'clock to 11, so I got on Zoom or something, or Skype or something like that, one of those two. And I got on there. I said, oh, man, no. I was talking Central Time. He goes, oh, I thought you stood me up or something. I said, no, I would never do that. We had a good laugh about that. But then he went through his progression, and just a beast of a player and a great human being as well from that interaction. So I'm going to try to take a lesson a month with Vincent Herring, and I'm going to get schooled. I'm going to keep myself going. I think that people forget that no matter that this is a growing process, that you never arrive in the context that you're talking, like your interaction with Miss Gordon and her talking about Dexter and his response to that. I think that once you become, you know how it works, and then you have your qualified opinion and you put your opinions out there, that's who you are artistically, but you don't ever stop growing. And in talking with Vincent, the thing that he reinforced in my own thinking was, as a teacher of other people and a mentor of other artists, as well as a performer and still working this music myself, he said, well, you deal with students who are a lot younger than I do. I deal with students who are college players who have really worked through their horn. And when I assign them things, they are struggling technically to what button to push down. Like, you have that added challenge onto your syllabus. And I said, yeah, that's true. But what you're telling me gives me an idea of approach. He says, yeah, what I would like you to do is sit down and make lesson plans of these things I'm telling you that you can apply to teaching those younger people to help qualify them sooner. And I said, well, that's exactly what I'm going to do of this. But what we often forget is it's an always learning thing. I think that's why I'm so energized about being a musician and a jazz musician on top of that, this American music, is that there's always something you can learn and do. Every time you pick your instrument up, there's an opportunity to get better if you're not tripping. And when you're tripping sometimes, as we all do, you catch yourself. The music catches you and straightens you out in some way, and without even necessarily being checked by your peers or something like this. But it's an honorable thing, and it's something that I think we all can do regardless of being in this situation. Like, that was during this pandemic that I was able to reach out to someone who I have admired their artistry for years. It was just like the first time I met Bobby Watson in person. I knew who Bobby Watson was when I was in high school, in Paola High School. I graduated in 1974. I knew who he was in Kansas City because I had heard of him. And I think I even heard him play once. I think he was playing in a church someplace. And he was just in high school. He was older than me in school, but holy smokes, I had been looking and admiring. So you never know who's watching you, and you never know the opportunities that you might get to interact with that person if you stay on this path. So anyone who is confined by their normal parameters, look at it from that standpoint too. I know they are. But find that project or that thing that perhaps you haven't had the time through the course of your life to concentrate on. Give it some of your energy and time, because this is the season for that. And it's also a season that we can really refocus and reorient as a community, I think,
Yeah, I agree, and it's interesting you say that. There's things that can happen now that would have never happened before, and it's just like interviews that I've just, when this happened, I thought, there's going to be cats that I can talk to that I would never have the opportunity to, and it's like, I got to speak to Mary Halverson for a while, Joe Lovano.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was wonderful, and they are who they are. Like, it was just a really, really good conversation, all of these conversations. Steve Cardenas was here 2 years ago with Dave Scott, and we talked after the show about talking, and he said, yeah, let me just wait till everything kind of calms down in the spring, and we never hooked up. And it's all of these moments, and now everybody's at home, everybody has this time, and I'm trying to really capitalize on that. But I'm also thinking, there's a part of me, I got the book from Ralph Peterson about interviews that he had. There was like the top 10 interviews, and I didn't really know about him until I started doing the show, and I really was reading into it and what he was asking and how he was doing it. I'm thinking, and as this has gone on, this is a very unique time. This may never happen again in the annals of our collective human history. And I have always admired the jazz musician. I've seen a lot of walks of life. I've been around a lot of jobs and people, and I'm a very curious human being, and I've never been around a group of people that I have found to be some of the finest specimens on this planet for their integrity, their level of being humble, their understanding of high art and artistry, and just doing it because they love it, not because it's a commercial success, and that's the jazz community. And what I've noticed over all these times of doing these interviews, and it seems very simple, but it's really not, is that every single moment that happens around you, whether it's a duck floating across the lake or something else like an acorn hitting the ground, it will never, ever happen like that again. That is a one unique thing, and no matter how much we want to Bill Murray and Groundhog Day something, it will never happen like that again. And this world being a new world that we live in is what you jazz musicians do all the time. You do improv through the storm and through the honey. And at the end of the day, my overall commentary is that it's such a pleasure and it's such an honor to be able to cover what you guys do, because your music brings me and has brought me my whole life so much comfort. And if I can, during this, document the stories of a real raw place that you already come from, but in a more raw place, I think this is going to be a document. I think this is going to be a sentiment that is going to be savory for a lot of people for a long time to come during something that can really be transformative and that can really show who you guys are. I mean, there's extreme versions, obviously, with cats moving to Costa Rica, but there's also very localized versions of people that are just trying to see what will transpire out of this. I mean, there was one musician, for instance, in Ohio from New York. He's releasing his first album ever, and he said something that I have not been able to shake. It's been so cool. And my general question is, what do you hope we come back from? When we come back to live music, what do we hope we realize? And he said, when Miles and Coltrane and all those cats were really inventing bebop, it wasn't being invented for commercial reasons, you know, Disney and Parker and all that. It was being invented out of the end of a war and extreme racism and extreme things that were going on in these guys' lives. And it was a reaction to their environment. And he said, what's to say we don't invent an idiom out of this? What's to say we don't invent something that's a new way of hearing and branding this music? And I was like, wow, there you go, man.
Yeah, that's heavy. That's heavy.
I mean, it's totally possible. And it, you know, Joe Lovano blew my mind when he was telling me that, you know, when the race riots happened, they burned all of the clubs down. And this was when jazz was roaring. All the albums that we buy, when The Love Supreme was made, they burnt jazz clubs down. And these guys had nowhere to go. God. So think about that. I mean, you think about right now, we have nowhere to go. And in a way, the virus has burned the clubs down. And everybody has to find a way, like you said at the very beginning here, of survival, of evolution, of the Darwinian notion of we have to find a way to reinvent who we are because the music is always going to be there. I mean, every time I ask, you know, what is it about jazz that you love, musicians always say two things: freedom and reinvention. No matter what happens, no matter what wall, no matter what dolt in the media decides to say jazz is dead, the musician will always do something opposite. It's kind of like saying, you know, that when it comes to like the internet and viruses that happen there, the geeks will always win. If you pick a fight with the geeks online, you're going to lose. Okay,
that's true. That's always been true.
You will never win, and it's the same thing with musicians. When you start saying things ding-dongy like jazz is dead, you better watch out because it's going to absolutely come back on you 1,000-fold in a way that you never expected. So be careful what you wish for, because at the end of the day, karma will level the playing field in a way that you can't even imagine.
Well, I think that you touched on something about the infrastructure. I think that you really, going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation or near the beginning of the conversation when we first started talking, the infrastructure, this is forcing us to look at the reality. No more can you be deceived into thinking, all I need to do is get my master's or doctorate in jazz studies, and then the world and record companies are going to just come to my feet. That paradigm has not existed for a generation, and the hype is still being sold in some context. What it's making people realize is, okay, I need to do this for the right reasons, first of all, and then I need to subsidize my own art. If I want to be an artist, then I need to find a way to subsidize that art and still be an artist. Or if I'm just going to sit in my apartment and just practice all day, then I've got to accept the fact that, okay, if I get sick, I can't go to the doctor. If I want to eat, I'm going to be limited. I'm going to eat a lot of ramen, or I'm going to share my place with 10 guys or gals or something, you know. If you can define that, I think that that's what we have the opportunity to do right now in these modern times. And for this youngest generation coming up in the music, we can show them the truth of things you're going to have to consider. If you want to do this life, it's a creative life, and all the successful ones had some kind of semblance of balance. The infrastructure was slightly different for Miles, but he was a good businessman. Ray Charles was an excellent businessman. He was one of the first people to own his his own masters, you know, and that was almost unheard of especially during the era that he was coming up with. So it's possible to do that. Someone else like Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, those people are successful. If you want a modern example of somebody who's successful, Pat Metheny, and he's from Kansas City. I mean, all you have to do is look at this cat, the way he puts on a production of a show, and then he's got his merchandise and all of that stuff going on. You look at his website. He was one of the very first musicians with a website that was professionally done. Joshua Redmond, look at his stuff. I mean, all of these cats are, if you want to look at them beyond their music, they're good business people too. And you've got to have that side of things as well. But it has the freedom. You can just sit around and play in your apartment and go play gigs and do that all your life. That's a free country. That's great. But for me personally, I wanted to model more like those guys and look at the music from that aspect and try to keep my art to specific things. You know, I want to play concerts. I want to play my original music. I want to play the music I want to, and trying to get guys together to rehearse so that they can play the music. We can all play the music together and become an ensemble. That's very difficult. That's the reason I did that residency at Black Dolphin, to get the guys so we became an ensemble, not just a core of really good players. You know, I think that is something that we can evaluate during times like this as well. You know, I think that you hit it on the head.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned Pat Metheny. If there's been a theme in all these interviews, I keep hearing his name. And maybe it's because when you own a car, you see that car. But I just moved to Lee Summit in January. And I remember, you know, my realtor was like, you know, houses just don't do good in the winter. Well, we started really moving around Thanksgiving, and then things really steamrolled over the break, and we moved after the first of the year. Love the house. It's the home of Pat Metheny. So every time people bring up Pat Metheny, I drive by downtown and see that sign, you know, the home of Grammy Award-winning jazz guitarist Pat Metheny. You know, I got married in July too, and I remember when we moved in.
Congratulations!
Thank you. And I'm glad it's not this July, but we have always had these momentous things, and we finally got in. We got settled. My wife said, you know, we don't have anything coming up. Hopefully, nothing happens. And I'm like, please, never ever say anything again. Just don't. All right, because.
Don't even jinx it that way.
Right. But I am glad now. I keep wanting to send my realtor a note because he was like, you know, maybe we should wait till spring. And I just want to send him a note and say, maybe we shouldn't have waited till spring. So, you know, because it all happened. But anyways, it's this year, I'm always been a big fan of April Fool's Day. You talk about a very somber thing. I remember producing my show, and like in my first monologue, I said, I know this seems like we're in an April Fool's joke, but this is it. This is our lives. And, you know, we just got to forge on. But what I've done too, just, you know, the one thing I've been telling musicians, you know, when I did go through the shock, I'm like, am I going to do the show? Because my best friend, John Christopher, who I engineer the show with, who's really the reason why I even did this show, and one of my very dear friends, I haven't seen him in like 6 weeks, and it's hard, and I know it's hard for all of us, but I really thought when I heard the first COVID-19 death, I'm like, this is something I want to weave into the show, and I'm going to have Lee on this week, and there's just a lot of these cats that I'm going to profile on the show, and I think that's a function of this too. It's that, you know, Mike Longo was the first one I found out about because I'm on the Smalls listserv, you know, and I got that email from them, and I'm like, you know, I'm going to put Mike on, and then from there, it was just different cats that have passed, and I think that's a function of this. Is like there's a part of people that are probably just kind of being hopeful and going on, but I think a part of me has been wanting to kind of go head on into this and say, all right, look, this is our world. We have to support the arts. We have to be conscious about this because the only thing that's really bringing us through when we're at home is the arts, whether it's visual, auditory, or paintings or whatever it is, and we have to be cognizant of that. That will pull us through this, and I think honoring these people that are going down because of this, like Ellis Marsalis and those, is that it's a very big function. And the one thing I was going to say too is I was thinking about as this conversation has gone on, all of these big names that I'm trying to reach out to that might have some time, and I was going to reach out to Wynton Marsalis, but I heard his 60 Minutes segment about a week ago, and it was so poignant, and he was on stage, it was empty, Jazz at Lincoln Center, and I could just see his eyes were wet, and they were like, it's empty, and we don't know when this is going to get filled back up. This is the epicenter of jazz in New York, and this institution is an epicenter, Jazz at Lincoln Center. I mean, there's nothing bigger than that. And he said, if your dad was around, what would he say to you? And he took a minute, he was just kind of pausing, and he said, what are you going to do? And he said, that's what he would say. He said, I don't want to hear what you're going to say. What are you going to do? And that was the interview. That was the only interview that anybody really needed to have with a superstar, whether it's Chick or Herbie or Wynton. What are you going to do? And that's where we're at right now. This is the moment where it's, what are you going to do? And I think I recognized that early on. Like, what am I going to do? Because, one of my favorite poets is Charles Bukowski, and his quote that I love the best is, what matters the most is how well you walk through the fire. And I actually said that to Al Di Meola, and he had a great Paul McCartney story. And he wrote that down, and I hope he reads Bukowski, because there's some poignant things. He's a raw cat, but there's some poignant things, and at the end of the day, I think that's a part of this. We're circulating ideas. We're giving each other some artistic hope. We're hopefully saying, look, whatever we do right now, we need to rely on each other. And I even asked Joe Lovano that. I said, of all of the years of being blessed that you've had, of all the cats that you've worked with, of all of the cusps of jazz history that you've arced into, of all of the luck on stage, of all of the things that you've gotten, what strength have you gotten from all of these cats? And he had his answer, but that's the thing I think about with everybody right now. I think about interviewing Sonny Rollins. People have been very reflective. My son, who's 15, has listened to a lot of these interviews with me. My stepdaughter has listened to a lot of these interviews, and it's given them a lot of hope. And I've told them at the end when they've been on speaker, my son and daughter have listened to you, and I decided that that's how I'm going to fill these days. That's going to be the education. I'm going to give my children what has always inspired me. So.
Man, bless your heart. That says it all. And I would like to encourage you and let you know, a lot of times we don't say this, but you are a blessing to the jazz scene worldwide and the music and everything else. You're as integral as the people making it in a lot of contexts, because you are amplifying and helping us reach people who we otherwise would not reach. And I would like to encourage you to post on social media more, so that we can make sure all of your episodes get out, because I'll spread them out. I am connected with about 8,000 people on 2 pages, and then I have artist pages, I have label pages, so I reach about 30,000 people that are connected with those pages, and I post, and people who know me know I use social media for music in my career. And those who don't like that, they don't connect with me. And the ones who do, if people fall off, other people come back on, and I end up with 5,000 people on one page, So yeah. I like to just promote the music. I think that's a constructive use of social media.
Yeah,
like
I agree.
when I first started with internet and email, I'd always get these chain letters, people forwarding chain letters, and everybody's email address exposed. I'm going, oh, Lord. I mean, that's what people are using it for, and this technology you can use to touch the world with. So, but I use it for music. So anything that you put out with this show, I'm going to post it, because I think that it's very important. I think it's important that we connect with it as a community, and people who are maybe advocates of the community connect with the people on the front lines that are actually making it work. There will be a Casey Area Youth Jazz. If we lift this up, like I said, there will be a Casey Area Youth Jazz season, even if it's 1 month, even if we're doing a single or an EP, but we are going to do the program. And we've got to release the 2019 album. It's almost ready, but we've got to release it.
And I put Light Dark on the show. I'm looking forward to that. And thank you for the kind words. And the one thing, I don't want to rush off here, but I actually have an interview with a singer from Denmark, Mette Juel. Have you heard of her?
I've heard of her. Yeah.
one thing that's happening, which is so refreshing, is there's a lot of artists that are reaching out to me, and they're mailing me discs and, really reaching out and really wanting to be a part of the show. Diane Scher's agent got a hold of me the other day, and I'm going to talk to her. I got her new album. So I'm kind of blown away by the response and people wanting to be involved, and I think it's just a wonderful community, and I'm so glad that I have the chance to, I really believe I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm just doing something that I love, and I'm holding you all up, because without the music, I'm not doing anything. But the fact that I can be...
Well, but you're getting some well-due, people are finding out about you, and you're getting some well-due things because people are taking notice. And hopefully, what I'm hoping is for all of the jazz centers, like Kansas City is a jazz center, whether people realize that or not. It is a jazz center, and hopefully that people start really coming back and recognize that. And having a show like yours and a journalist like yourself doing what you're doing in the modern media, that elevates us and updates us to the 21st century. So that's a lot of my thanks there, too. And I'm honored to be on your program, and I know you got to go, so whenever you have to go, say, Chris, stop talking.
Man, I could go on. No, it's good. I could go on and on and on, but I do, as I'm kind of sitting here being nostalgic, I remember going out to the library this summer, and I think about how free all of this is, and I think we all have to hold on to that, because there's going to be a point where I hope we don't lose the fact that we can just roll a window down during the summer, let the wind roll in, and head to a show and just think about it. Like the other day, when this all started, I'm like, what can we do outside? And I'm like, I'm going to get a set of Frisbee golf discs. And all Walmarts and Targets and all this, it's either expensive or won't be here for a month and a half. I found some weird camping pool store in like Wisconsin that had a set that was cheap, and they sent it. And this weekend we finally got a chance to do it, and we went to where we thought there was going to be a disc park up by the zoo, and it wasn't there. So there was one that's out in Prairie Village, and we're going there, and my wife's like, this looks really familiar. And we pull up, and it's exactly where they have the Prairie Village Jazz Fest. And I'm just sitting there looking around like, wow, I'm kind of here, but I'm not, and we're in a quarantine.
Wow.
And we're just looking at the bright side. We're playing some golf. We're not inside. There's other people. We're dodging discs and laughing, and dogs are running. It's like it's like just like with this. This is the thing. I know that my kids hearing these interviews, which I never do in front of them, is therapy. Yesterday, I spoke with, when that Spaniard was on his deck and we could hear it, I could just see my wife's eyes just kind of just like glaze over, like she was kind of like, wow. Like I keep telling them about all of these people from around the world, all of these stories, and all of our conversations are hopeful, and I know that that's seeping in. I mean, there was even one musician in New York that was like, the act of smiling, the act of using muscles to make your inflection different, or to smile, or to do something, is inherently going to ripple in a positive way. And if all of these conversations of what I already do is just a part of what I already do, and that can infuse my kids, that they can understand how much I love this, and it can be love that they feel, the symbiotic circle of that is something that I don't know that I can even conceptualize, other than it's just good. It's just something that's good that can be done during a world of uncertainty. So we just got to keep on keeping on. We got to be hopeful. And again, yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of started talking here at the end. I got like 2 minutes before I got a call, but you were the first person in Kansas City that I wanted to make sure that I had a very good, hearty conversation with, so that I could put it out there and that we could really let people know this is Kansas City. We're doing conversations from around the world, but it always comes back local, because that's where the show is from, and that's the community that I love. So that's why I wanted to reach out.
Well, thank you, brother. Amen. And keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Leavenworth, Kansas, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Christopher for his time, his music, and dedication, as always, to Kansas City Jazz. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
jazz.